Okay. See, I've been covering Central Europe for quite a while now, and I really thought I'd seen it all. We have Orbán's love affair with Putin, Kaczynski's attempts to pack the courts in Poland, and Fico's corruption in Slovakia. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for how we started 2026 over here in Czechia. See, we started it by watching the third highest constitutional representative of the country deliver what must have been the most disgusting and shameful speech ever delivered by a high-ranking official in the country's history. He delivered it from his fucking living room, shot it on his phone, and even had bad lighting while recording it. And it was so bad and it was so disgusting that unfortunately we have to discuss it here as well. I'm Jan, this is Prague Pulse, and I'm so tired of this shit already. Just a short recap, if you watch Prague Pulse, you already know that Czechia actually had an election in October 2025, which the now new Prime Minister Babiš and his ANO party totally dominated. They wiped the floor with their opponents and gained over 34% of the vote, which was actually the second best election result in the country's history ever. Impressive, sure, but the problem for Babiš is that 34% is still less than 50, so it's not enough for him to build a majority government. So Babiš needed to go and look for coalition partners. Sounds quite standard, right? Sure. But the problem for Babiš specifically is that not many of his political opponents like him or even respect him. We could, of course, discuss why that is, and there may be more reasons. One of them probably Babiš's very problematic past, because let's just say that not many people generally like or respect former agents of the communist secret police, but that's for another discussion. The fact of the matter is that because he had so many issues with actually finding someone willing to govern with him, he needed to go to the very fringes of the Czech political spectrum to look for support. And he found that support with the SPD and its leader, Tomio Okamura. It's a party we've already discussed on Prague Pulse as well, and it's a party that can be rightfully labeled far right. It went so far that the SPD has actually been targeted as a true and real risk to Czechia's internal security. And Okamura himself, funnily enough, the courts ruled recently that he can be safely labeled a fascist precisely because of what the party he leads represents. Now, for Babiš, the problem is that he really depends on support of parties like the SPD for at least two reasons. One, he naturally wants power. And if you ask me, it makes sense because, as I said, he really dominated the election, so it's natural that he now wants to govern. But the second reason is probably even more important in Babiš's case, and that is that he is existentially dependent on being in power because he's now being prosecuted by the Czech courts. And if he can secure a government position, if he can be supported by a majority in the parliament, that means that his immunity stands and he cannot be prosecuted any longer and he cannot be sent to jail. And that all means that he is quite easily prone to blackmail because small parties like the SPD now gain disproportionately more power in the government and in the coalition negotiations. Take the SPD specifically. The party gained just around 8% of all the votes. So they're basically worth a rounding error. But because of how important they are for Babiš, at least for now, Okamura knows this. He may be a far-right asshole, but he's not stupid. So he's using that outsized influence now to put pressure on Babiš and throw tantrums like he has done. Don't get me wrong, Babiš knows very well what he got himself into because the SPD has always been a deeply problematic party. They've built their entire existence on spreading conspiracies, all the way from COVID, now to Ukraine, to peddling Kremlin propaganda and all sorts of lies that you can imagine. We have it all, everything you can think of. We have COVID vaccines implanting chips into your body. We have Ukraine being run by Nazis and Zelensky being a drug addict. Everything you can think of, the SPD has spread in the past because it's just who they are. And Babiš knew that very well when he got himself into the government with them. So acting surprised right now about what Okamura has said about Ukraine is basically like buying a pit bull and then being surprised that the dog has bit your neighbor. So the real question to ask ourselves now is basically this. Who is really running Czechia? Is it Andrej Babiš, who is the prime minister on paper at least, or is it in fact Okamura, who, yes, he's barely got 7% of the vote in the election, but he has so much power over Babiš, who cannot lift a finger against Okamura, because if he does, the SPD can very well leave the government, and that leaves Babiš open for prosecution, and he may possibly even face jail time. So, So basically, we have a quasi-pro-Russian YouTuber with a bad phone camera and lighting, spreading all kinds of lies about Ukraine and other stuff, running the show, while the real prime minister just sits by idly and does nothing, because he has no real power. And that's the really frustrating thing over here right now. Now, the very sad thing for all of us now is that because of how incredibly dependent Babiš now is on Okamura and his votes, he's made him the third highest constitutional representative of the country to basically shut him up. He's made him the Speaker of the Chamber of Deputies. And as the Speaker, Okamura of course now has all sorts of really nice prerogatives. And among those prerogatives is, for example, access to top secret intelligence, among others, by the very service that's labeled him and his party a very real security risk to Czechia's internal security. Let that sink in. The very guy who's been a risk to Czechia's internal security is now sitting basically at the helm of the country. So yeah, to say the very least, the situation in Czechia is not great. Anyway, as the Speaker, Okamura has put out a grandiose video on January 1st labeled the New Year's Speech of the Speaker. Of course, the video looks basically like a hostage video, as I said, shot on his phone in his living room. In the video, he's again spouted lies and nonsense, mainly about Ukraine. For example, he's called the regime in Ukraine a junta and again repeated the well-debunked lie that Czech citizens, and of course mainly Czech pensioners, are basically subsidizing this useless war and losing money. We have solid data that proves over and over again that yes, while Czechia has sent significant amounts of money to Ukraine, it has gained even more in return because Ukrainian refugees have been living and earning money in Czechia and of course paying taxes here. And however cynical it may sound, Czech companies have been earning shit tons of money on the war, but that doesn't matter to people like Okamura. What matters to them is of course spreading lies and inciting hatred. He's literally said in the speech that Ukrainians are building golden toilets from our money. Now, let's stop here for a second, because as any good disinformation, there is a grain of truth in this statement by Okamura as well. Let's dissect it, shall we? First, it is true that Ukraine has had its fair share of issues with corruption. I mean, who hasn't? He's most likely referring to the case of Timur Mindic, who used to be a close associate of President Zelensky before the war, and it is now alleged that he stole over $100 million from Ukrainian state energy companies. So in that part at least, Okamura is actually correct. Yes, there was a large corruption scandal. But what Okamura is conveniently forgetting to tell you is that it was Ukraine itself who've uncovered the scandal and who are now prosecuting the scandal. Mindic is wanted by the Ukrainian authorities, and of course he's fled Ukraine, you can guess where, and he's been stripped of his Ukrainian citizenship by President Zelensky, who's claimed himself that there's no place in Ukrainian society for people like him. Even more laughable is Okamura's claim that Ukraine's government is a junta. Let me remind you there, Tomio, that over 73% of all Ukrainians actually elected Zelensky. Your tiny useless party of pro-Kremlin cronies got barely 8% of the vote. So who's got the bigger mandate here? And as for the usual claim of pro-Kremlin puppets like you that this war is senseless, it's not really worth my time even, but let's just say that thousands of children have been kidnapped to Russia. Over 95% of prisoners of war of Ukraine have been tortured by the Russians. Countless of women are being raped every day, and fucking kindergartens and hospitals are being bombed by the dictator in the Kremlin. And you tell me, of all people, that this is senseless. screw you. Following Okamura's scandalous speech, Ukraine's ambassador to Czechia, Mr. Vasil Zvarič, reacted to it on his social media. Of course he did. He called the speech scandalous and shameful, because it was, and basically called on the more reasonable parts of the Czech political spectrum to do something about it. Of course he did. His country was just attacked by a very high-ranking Czech official, so it's only natural that you would try to defend the country that you're supposed to represent. The reaction of the Czech government? The Czech Foreign Minister, Petr Matsinka, representing the second junior party in Babiš's coalition, the Motorists, about whom you've already heard on Prague Pulse as well, you know, the party who loves neo-Nazis, has threatened to summon Ukraine's ambassador. And Babiš's sidekicks, like Minister of Finance Šilerová, they piled on, of course, and called the ambassador hysterical and his response inappropriate. Are you fucking kidding me? Of course, I know that as a foreign diplomat posted in a country, you should hypothetically keep your mouth shut and be as neutral as possible, yeah. But we're talking about a country at war, a country that's being verbally attacked by lies by someone who has real power, unfortunately for all of us. And that guy, the ambassador, is the only government representative in the country. So it has to be him who is there in the first line of defense and saying something when the country is being unjustly attacked by Okamura. And there was no one from the brand new government speaking up against Okamura. Not a single soul. Babiš remains silent as if nothing happens. He downplays Okamura's role. And the new Czech government even claims that, look, we've taken on the highest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita in Europe, so the ambassador should be more modest. Are you kidding me? Sure, Czechia has helped. Czechia has helped a lot, but that doesn't mean that an ambassador has to endure every sort of lie and nonsense that someone from the Czech Republic throws his way. Doesn't work like that. And this is hardly just a single lone incident where the SPD has been involved in. No, it's one in a very long chain of highly questionable statements or actions by SPD representatives. In the past, as I've said, they've questioned COVID. They've said that chips are being implanted in vaccines. SPD representatives have even questioned the Holocaust in the past, and I could go on and on and on. They're just so deep in conspiracies that for them, it now means that they will play the role of the Kremlin's useful idiot in Czechia. And by the way, during the 2015 refugee crisis, where they of course were against Islam because that was trendy at the time, they radicalized a pensioner from Czechia so that he became the only convicted Czech terrorist so far. Yes, you heard me. Jaromír Balda committed a terror attack a few years back because he was radicalized by the SPD and wanted to spread fear of Islam, and so he caused a large-scale train accident, which carried injuries, of course, and blamed it on Islamists. And he confessed later in court that he'd only done it because he was a fan of the SPD and they've been telling him in the media that Islam is a plague. So yeah, the only Czech terrorist is a fan of the SPD. Let that sink in. That's exactly where spreading hatred and fear leads to. And now they've been doing the same with Ukraine. What Okamura and the SPD have been doing is actually the ultimate example of hypocrisy. See, Okamura himself obviously has a migration background. Nothing would be bad about it if he wasn't the leader of the most far-right anti-migration party that's basically against anything that's a bit different to the mainstream in Czechia. And maybe even a worse thing is that he doesn't even believe what he's preaching. He's just figured out that that's the easiest way for himself to get rich, by spreading fear and hatred among the population. You want proof that he doesn't mean it? Initially, around 2008, Okamura actually was a tourism entrepreneur, and he made his living and considerable wealth by promoting multiculturalism. In 2008, Okamura was named the EU's Intercultural Dialogue ambassador. His literal job was promoting tolerance among culture. He actually even sat on the selection committee of the Czech beauty pageant Miss Expat. Now forget about how sexist it is for a while and just focus on the fact that he praised the value of multiculturalism for the Czech Republic. That was before he entered politics. But then he figured out that by spreading fear, he can carve out a space for himself on the Czech political spectrum, and that will increase his power and financial wealth. So now he basically campaigns on a Czechia first, foreigners out kind of campaign, but he's not really good at it. So within just a few years, Okamura's made it from the EU's intercultural ambassador to an Eastern European racist. And when confronted with the fact that he behaves like a racist, he said himself that he cannot possibly be a racist because, and I quote, he is half yellow. So that's your classic defense against anything, right? Racism, I cannot be racist, I'm half yellow. I cannot be homophobic, I have many friends who are gay. Doesn't work like that, Tomio. But unfortunately, for at least 7% of the Czech population, that's enough, and they still elect the SPD. And that 7% is precisely the reason why he has such an outsized influence over Babiš and the rest of the government. Babiš is afraid of him because he needs him for his own political survival. So that means that he keeps quiet and lets Okamura do anything he wants and say all sorts of lies that he wants to say, because no one in this new government has any sort of spine to stop it. So there you have it. Within literally 2 months, Czechia has made it from a respected player on the international stage to disrespecting a country literally fighting for its survival, having a guy with a literal migration background being the biggest bigot and racist in Czech politics, and a prime minister who doesn't even have the power to stop his own junior coalition partner from telling open lies in the public. I'm not saying that the previous Czech government was perfect. We could spend hours discussing mistakes that they've made. But especially given Czechia's historical memory of 1938 Munich and the forced occupation of a significant portion of the country, we should behave differently as it pertains to foreign policy and Ukraine, because we've literally been there. People have refused help to us the same way as Okamura would like to see, and we all know what it led to in 1939. Didn't stop anything, and all those calling for appeasement were left ashamed and embarrassed. I just think we all deserve better. Anyway, so sorry for this rant. I just really needed to get it out of my system, because what happened, how fast it happened, and how fast we've made the U-turn in foreign policy has been incredible. But rest assured, that's all the more reason why we keep monitoring the region, because more than ever before, what happens in small countries like Czechia has serious ramifications for the entire continent. Because if Babiš yields to puppets like Okamura, Masinka, or the neo-Nazi, they can quickly join the ranks of Orbán and Fico, and we have one more country to block any meaningful help to Ukraine, and then we have a big problem. So we'll definitely be watching, because there's a lot to watch. So if you don't want to miss it, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It really helps me grow. And also let me know if you'd like to see a rant video like this one on the channel from time to time. Thank you again. This has been Jan. See you next time.